It's the morning drive.
Good morning and welcome to the Morning Drive. I'm your host, Brooks Fiesinger of BrooksFiesinger.com and MillionaireWho.com, where we help you stabilize your wallet, secure your future, and succeed in entrepreneurship and finance. I'm here with my co-host again, Hyundai Sonata. All right, let's get going. Now, today is part 2 of our intro to investing. If you have not had the opportunity to listen to last week's podcast, I urge you to start there because this is a continuation of it. Last week we talked about investing, introducing investing, why we're investing, and why investing is important even to someone who doesn't consider themselves an investor. After all, if you have money and even just a few bucks that you are starting to save up because you have managed to stabilize your wallet and you are now not living paycheck to paycheck, then you will want to make sure as part of that you are using your money to work for you. You worked hard for your money, now let it work for you, because when money starts working for you, then it starts growing, and that is the coolest thing in the world ever, you know? It's kind of funny to think about it, but you think if you had enough money and you had it working for you, earning interest, then you can literally not be dependent on your job or your income to live. How cool is that, right? You can literally live off of that income. Now, that doesn't mean you should stop, because most people, once they get excited about it and they start doing that well, they're going to start just doing more and do cooler stuff with that. So anyway, that's why we are learning about investing. And there's several different places we were discussing that you can and should invest. Last week, we discussed real estate and the stock market. This week, we were talking about entrepreneurship and other assets. After we talk about entrepreneurship and assets, we'll roll these 4 up and kind of recap how I approach them and how they can be approached. All right, so starting with entrepreneurship. All right, so why would entrepreneurship be brought up as a way to quote unquote invest? This might throw some people for a loop because they're going to think of entrepreneurship as a way to create income. Now, that is true. However, I would view any entrepreneurial endeavor that actually generates significantly more cash flow than it takes in time and effort as an investment mechanism. For example, there's one company I own that I only spend a few hours a month on, right? So the day-to-day operations are managed by a whole bunch of employees that do a great job. There's actually a dog daycare, dog country daycare in Hamilton. And I don't deal with that kind of stuff on a day-to-day basis. The first year it was open, I spent a whole lot of time down there. I mean, I spent probably 600 hours down there during the year. But more recently, I don't spend that much time down. I have phone calls, we have conferences, talk about strategy, talk about approach, talk about expansion, talk about buying things, saving money, more of that strategery. And speaking of strategery, I don't even know if it's a real word. I've used that forever, and I think we used to joke about making it a word. But anyway, I'm going to use the word strategery, so hopefully you like it. So that's the kind of stuff that I focus on. Well, I would consider that investment more than, an actual active day-to-day business for me. I'm somewhat active, but I have a lot of flexibility. I can work on it when it's convenient for me. We have conference calls, but I'm not involved with the day-to-day stuff. That's an investment, right? You can invest like that. Now, for some of us, we're going to think that those type of investments are going to be quite expensive, right? In the case that I'm referring to, it took a lot of money up front to buy and start rolling this venture. But you might find that you can actually play a much smaller role by simply investing in somebody else's adventure. So what I mean by that is, say for example, you know somebody who is starting a business or running a business and they need some extra cash. If they need some extra cash, how can they get it? Well, one of the easiest ways and highly recommended ways to get money is to request it from friends and family. That's where you come in, all right? Now, there's actually a whole lot of websites you can go to, and I'm not going to get into these in depth, where you can actually invest in other people starting their businesses. And some of them, you actually buy a product in advance. That's not what I'm talking about, because while you are helping them get started, you're not actually getting a return from the success of the business. There are some others that are more peer-to-peer lending where you get a return as far as a percentage. Again, that is a viable way to invest, but that's not necessarily what I'm referring to here either. So what I'm referring to for the most part is working with somebody to invest in their company to therefore get a partial ownership of their company or a return on the company. Now, I want to be careful here because this is considered highly risky. And the reason it's often considered highly risky is because there's so much that is totally out of your control. Because it's out of your control, you might be at the whims of somebody else and what they're doing. And that means a lot of people might say, hey, I put $10,000 in my friend's business, it failed, I lost all $10,000. That's a risk you take. What I urge you to do, if you're serious about investing this way, is be smart, right? Don't just invest with your friend or your neighbor because they ask you to. Sometimes we feel obliged to help our family members, our kids, our parents, our friends because they're our friends, we want to see them succeed. So they come with a half-baked business and say, hey, if you give me $10,000 of your savings, I'll make you a billionaire, right? That's almost a guaranteed recipe for failure. Let's get some things right. Most business startups fail. So unless you're willing to lose the money, I wouldn't even touch startups. So once again, I wouldn't even think about startups. If I was going to invest in a startup, I would only invest in hard assets. So once again, if I had a friend who was starting a business and wanted someone to invest, then I might say, okay, can I invest in the building that you're in, right? Because then even if the business fails, I own that building, and hopefully the asset of that building is worth more than we owe. Therefore, it is once again, I can get my money back and maybe even make a profit on it. Those are the kind of investments that I look at when I'm investing with a small startup or somebody that I know. But most of the time, I'm going to stay away from it. I will invest in some of these things sometimes for fun, literally for fun. It's almost like gambling. And it's a gambling where your odds of winning are higher than maybe playing a true lottery. But realistically, you have to be prepared to lose it all. So I won't gamble with a whole bunch. I might gamble with a little bit just to have fun because it's something that excites me. Once again, you want to be careful with that because you've got to recognize you could lose something if you go with those startups. However, there are some lower risk investments than you can in businesses, and that is, do you have a successful company that you know of that needs money to grow? It's less risky to invest in a business that's trying to grow. Therefore, if somebody has money or has a business and they need an investment so they can make it bigger, maybe open another location or buy more inventory, then the risk level certainly drops. You can review their operations, you can look into it and say, does this make sense? Is this going to work? I'd be willing to do this in many circumstances, and I've offered to do this and have actually taken advantage of a few of these situations. Not as many as I'd like, but it certainly is something that can and does work. And what I've done and what I can see do is somebody says, okay, look, we have a successful business and I'm buying a second location and I need a little bit of money to float the first month, or I need a little bit of money to buy the first set of inventory, all right? If that's the case, there's no reason you can't consider, once again, consider, doesn't mean do it in every situation, consider the ramifications of doing so. If somebody was opening up a second dog daycare location and they needed $2,000 to buy food and toys to sell in the store, and those purchase price were based on wholesale, therefore the actual market value is closer to $4,000, is that a worthwhile investment? Possibly. What kind of return can you get, right? If I invested that money to somebody and they offered to give me 15% annual return and they're a successful business that I didn't doubt would fail, why not float them that money, right? I would view the risk as low, it's asset backed, and while I would want to stay on top of it, that could be a very easy way to get a quick return, maybe not super quick, but a reasonably quick return with a pretty good return. That is something that's viable. $2,000 doesn't seem like a huge return. If you've only got $2,000, that might seem like a good return. But if you're sitting on $100,000, $2,000 might not be worth your time. However, in those cases, a lot of times you can do things like invest in somebody, hard money loans, to buy goods that they have or to take on equity that they have. And what I mean by that is, say for example, the same scenario, this company is opening up a second location. Their first location is very successful, has strong cash flow, and they paid off the building. Well, maybe I would give them a loan collateralizing stuff that they have. Therefore, if the loan goes south, I can actually call those goods that I've collateralized. Therefore, my risk is much lower, but I can still get a very strong return because I might be willing to offer them better terms than a bank will. In some situations, a bank might want 8-10%. Maybe you're willing to do 6 or 8%, and you can actually be cheaper than the bank. But since it's collateralized as low risk, those are options that you can do as well. Another thing you can do is actually buy a business. And once again, this is something, earlier I talked about some things you can do when you have very little money, some things take more. If you can buy a business for a couple of $100s, I wouldn't consider it a business worth investing in. That doesn't mean you can't buy it because you want to run it. If it's only selling for a few $100, then that would tell me they're not a profitable self-fulfilling business, right? It requires somebody to do the work. It's going to probably be like a peer-to-peer type of thing. Probably not worth your time as investment. But when you get a little bit more money saved up, say for example, you go buy a company, there's one we were looking at the other day, that was about 1.5 million. It was 1.5 million and required zero day-to-day operation. This is kind of like that business I was referring to before that I was invested in. In these type of situations, you put forth a lot of money, but then you get returns from the business and you get the benefits of all the business growth. Is this riskier than some other stock trading? Certainly. But on the flip side, I would say it's less risky because as long as you do the homework and you understand what you're getting into, you actually have more control over the outcome. If you have more control over the outcome, then I would argue it's actually less risky because now you're not dependent on stuff that's outside of your control, right? You can affect the staffing, you can affect the investments, you can affect the growth, you can affect what they sell, you can affect where they sell. I would look at that as low risk, but it's higher risk if you don't do your homework. And that's a kicker you're probably seeing in a lot of these areas. You can make a lot of money in these areas if you're willing to do your homework. If you don't do your homework, you're going to get yourself into trouble. And you're going to get yourself into trouble because you're going to take on a bunch of risk without realizing what you're getting yourself into. All right? So once again, this is a great example of where you can do your homework and you can make a killing, right? There's a lot of money to be made in buying an existing business, especially if you can do something to turn out more profit. Some things that you can do to turn out more profit is cut costs or combine it with something else to become more profitable. Say, for example, I buy another business that does the same things my business does. We're doing this right now too. Then I can actually cut some back office expenses, maybe legal expenses, maybe operation expenses, maybe tax expenses, billing, that sort of thing. I can cut those because I only need one office doing them. I don't need 5 offices doing them. So if you go to a company and say 20% of their cost is back office stuff, and you can cut out 99% of that by merging it with your other operations, you just increase the profitability of that company by 20%, and that 20% profit goes right in your pocket. Talk about a way to make some good money, right? So that's a way you can make some big money buying. So once again, you can go buy a business that's out there, and then when you buy that business, there's several things you can do. Once again, you can figure out how to cut costs on it. You can just use it to keep turning out cash flow, kind of the cash cow mentality of you're just going to keep taking that month-to-month cash flow. Or you can use it to pay off debts and therefore build up an asset base, which you can therefore ultimately sell. There's a bunch of different approaches, but they all require one thing, that's do your homework, right? Back to school for you. Do your homework if you're gonna buy a business. If you do your homework, you can make it big. If you don't do your homework, you're gonna walk yourself into a wall. The last thing on here with entrepreneurship is you can actually create a business. Now I know some of you are probably thinking, wait, creating a business? That to me sounds like it is not an investment. That is taking on a new career or a new job. And it can be, right? This can be taken either way. But what I urge you to do is look at the way you can create a business that maybe isn't, right? And what I mean by that is there some sort of business you could technically create that wouldn't require you to work on things on a day-to-day basis, that maybe they could run on their own? If so, then even though that's technically a business startup and a business creation, you are investing in it. You're not just starting up a business. So what would potentially be an example where you could create a business and as an investment? Well, some of the examples that I've used before have been, can you go buy a bunch of things for $2 and then sell them for 30? Maybe it only takes you an hour a week But the real value is the fact that you're buying that stuff up front and then reselling it. There's a shop by our house, for example, that is a flea market. And the flea market doesn't require you to be there. There's somebody that staffs the flea market. All you have to do is set up the booths. And then once the booths are set up, people can just come in, see what they want, and buy them. Well, why can't you invest in stuff in the flea market, leave it to sit there, and let somebody else sell it for you, right? Is that requiring you day-to-day work? No. You maybe once a month work, once a week work, right? So there's another great example where instead of you spending a ton of time running a business, you are investing in a business, right? You're buying the assets and then you're selling the assets. And when you're selling the assets, you are waiting, you're allowing somebody else to buy these things, and it's not requiring you to necessarily work the business, right? There's a bunch of other ones you can do with this. Can you create a business by, say, for example, buying books? I met somebody, and I won't go into too much detail because I don't want to share a secret, but he literally goes out there and buys royalties rights to books. You can call this other assets, and we'll get into that in a minute, but he created a company around owning books. Well, once you buy the book and you own the book, you start collecting royalties on that book. Once again, this is kind of getting into other assets, but you can also see how you can think of that as running a business. You can do things similar. Could it be buying a parking garage? Could it be buying something that's on the borderline of creating a business and buying a business? Buying something that already exists and turning it into a business, making small tweaks to create more profitability, that sort of thing. So once again, that takes a little more creativity, but sometimes those can have a higher ROI. So once again, I would say those are higher risk, higher chance of failure, but in many times you can create a business that will actually generate higher potential or high potential profit and high returns on your investment, but it's really creating something from scratch. It's something that doesn't already exist. So those are kind of ways that you can actually approach entrepreneurship as an investment. And a lot of people don't look at entrepreneurship as an investment until they get into really high dollar signs, when they're talking about having $100 million and they're talking about going out and buying businesses. But you can actually start to get involved even before you're a millionaire. Even if you only have a few $1,000s saved up, there's ways you can get involved with entrepreneurship. So once again, that is certainly an option. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is investing in other assets. And what do I mean when I say other assets, right? And I just mean this as a catch-all for something that doesn't fall into, say, for example, real estate or businesses. Businesses are kind of entrepreneurship. That's your small businesses, your startups, or the stock market. Those are large publicly traded companies where you're buying a fraction of them. Real estate is, buying physical real estate properties. But there's a bunch of things besides real estate you could actually invest in. Some examples are commodities, right? You can get involved with the commodity market. I had a little bit of fun for a while in college, actually, graduate school, playing with the commodity market and learning a lot about it. And there's a lot to be made in that if that is something that interests you. Now, I'll tell you right now, do I have a tiny bit of experience in it? Yes, but I've not found myself somebody who's heavily involved with the commodity market. Won't call myself an expert on it, so you have to do some research on your own. But once again, commodities are similar in many ways to the stock market, but in many ways, the things that drive the stock market down often cause commodities to rise. Therefore, some people find them an excellent partnership to the stock market to help mitigate their investment risks in the stock market. Other people can really create some really cool analytics and forecasting mechanisms to approach commodities in order to generate substantial returns by forecasting what's going to happen in the future in ways that are a lot easier than the stock market. Because I know a lot of people like to use the term in the stock market that, the question is, the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. And the idea with that phrase is, you might know that a stock is overvalued or undervalued, but that doesn't mean the market is rational and the market always responds. I find the commodity markets a lot more practical. So in other words, you can kind of forecast a little better. You can make them more predictable, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily less risky. So in many ways, they can be very risky. I would not say that they are less risky, even though they may be more predictable in many cases. In other cases, they could be non-predictable. Once again, it depends on how much you understand them and how much you're willing to trust them. Now, what are some other assets you can play with? I'm going to mention cars, and cars amuses me for a moment because, most people look at cars as something that depreciates, that you can't make any money in cars, right? I've heard that statement a million times. I've heard people say, don't buy cars, buy cheap cars because you just lose money. The reason why I find that funny is because I have made a good amount of money in my life kind of flipping cars. And at a minimum, I don't lose money when I buy cars. And so, I've had probably 60 plus cars now. And a number of people have asked me, how are you always buying new cars? How can you just keep buying cars? The reason I can keep buying cars, if you don't lose money on them or you make money when you buy and sell cars, how can you afford not to keep buying cars? Like, why not own 10 cars if you make a profit in every one of them, right? And so I never understood those statements because, once again, I make profits on my cars. I can make big profits on my cars. And sometimes I wonder why more people don't make profits on their cars, right? Cars are pretty simple. You can buy them low and sell them high. They're very predictable. I can look in the future and tell you what cars are going to be cheap when and how to make money off of them. I wrote a book on it, right? So I'm going to talk about this in a future podcast. But if you're interested, go out there right now on Amazon and look up CARS, C-A-R $, the ins and outs of buying and selling. That's the book that I wrote. Shows you how to do it, right? How you can actually make money. And those who know me know that I do it all the time, right? Like almost every car I buy, I turn for a profit. So there's really no reason why you can't do the same thing. And I kind of laugh about it because as long as you understand that asset very well, you understand cars, there's no reason anyone can't do it. You can do it, right? I buy trucks, I make a profit. I buy Jeeps, I make a profit. I buy cars, I make a profit. I buy sports cars, I make a profit. I made a killing buying a Ferrari, for goodness sakes, right? And so it's like, if you're going to make money buying a Ferrari, why don't you buy Ferraris every week? It's almost a joke, or it's almost humorous. Because why not buy it if you're going to make a profit off of it? But the key with cars is you got to understand cars very well. And if you understand cars very well, you can make a lot of money in it. What you have to do in order to make a lot of money in it, though, is you have to, once again, understand how the market changes, when it shifts, and you need to understand the value of these cars or these assets so that you can offer to buy one when they're on the market. Now, I will buy any car from anyone at any time. And what I mean by that is anybody can come to me and say, hey, would you buy this car? My answer is always yes. And then I'll name a price. If you offered me right now a Lotus Evora 400 in yellow, and that's a car I would really like to buy and I've been kind of looking at, I would pay you, $70,000 or $60,000 for one, right? If it's got what I want and it's the right mileage, everything's good, right? But if you showed me a 2001 Jeep TJ, then I would probably say, okay, look, they're slightly overinflated in price right now. They're going to decline in price when the new Jeep comes out. Therefore, it's selling for about $84.50, $82.50, depending on the trim. I'll pay you $6,000 for it, right? And so if I walk down the street and somebody's selling a Jeep TJ for $5,000, I'll go look at it, and if I know I can turn it for more than I'm paying, why not buy it? And I'll enjoy it for a little while, and then I'll go sell it at a profit. Someone down the street from me a couple of years ago was selling a Jeep CJ7, and they wanted $250 for it, right? And so I'm sitting there thinking, why wouldn't I pay $250 for it? So I bought it on the spot, right? I bought it within minutes of them selling it. They were happy, they got what it was worth. I bought it, it had some rust issues, it had some other issues, but guess what? I was able to buy it, play with it for a little while, sell it for more than I paid for it. That's pretty straightforward experience. That kind of stuff happens all the time. Why did I go in so much detail about the cars? I don't necessarily think a bunch of you are going to go out there and start flipping cars today, right? But what you can start doing is you can use the same approach and same mentality to almost any assets, right? When you understand assets really, really well, then you can start to profit off of them, whatever the asset is. So there's some other assets that I know people get involved with: stamps, coins, guns, right? I know people who go out and buy guns online. They know what they're worth. They buy them from somebody who doesn't know what they're worth, and then they sell them to a gun store or somebody else for a big profit. I know people that do the same thing with coins. I know people that do the same thing with stamps, right? They know that a certain stamp or a baseball card or a coin is worth, $1,800. And so when they go to a local flea market and find that coin or that stamp for $25, they buy it and then they flip it. And what flipping really is, in my mind, is it's not necessarily just improving something, although that is typically what people talk about when they talk about flipping houses. The best type of flipping, though, is really understanding when there's one place that's going to pay more for something than another, and it's moving it from point A to point B. One of the best stories was when I was a kid, and I used to actually make my first killing on Beanie Babies. This will be another story someday, right? So I made my first massive profit selling Beanie Babies. Now, this might sound questionable to some people, but at the time, what I would do is I would actually buy Beanie Babies from kids at school and online and stuff like that for like 5 times what they paid, right? They'd go pay $5.50 for one at the store. Then I'd offer them $25 and they'd say, oh my gosh, I made $25 off a $5 Beanie Baby. Then what I would do, because I knew the value of these beanies, is I would take that Beanie Baby and then I would, go online to tie.com and I would sell the thing for $250, right? Making a killing. At one point, I had one of the most valuable Beanie Babies of all time that I bought from somebody, and I paid, I forget exactly what I paid. I think I paid about $200 for it. And then I sold it for a lot more, and it was spot without a spot, right? One of the rarest Beanie Babies of all time. And once again, the person who sold to me was really happy. In that case, I was completely transparent with them throughout the whole process. They knew I was going to sell it for a lot of money, but they didn't know how to sell it for a lot. They didn't want to deal with it. So a lot of times you can find somebody who doesn't want to go through all that effort. They don't want to learn about it. They don't want to go find out where to sell it. And when you find those people, you can sell it for them and make a killing. I've had other people who've offered for me to sell stuff for them on eBay, and they say, hey, I'll let you have 20% if you can sell it. When somebody tells me that on something that's $10, I say no. But if they tell me that on a car, I say, all right, let's go. Right? I'll sell your car online if you let me keep 20%. So those are the kind of situations where, as long as you understand asset better than most other people do, then you can make a very good profit off of them by playing those markets and understanding in places where they're more valuable than others. And so in those cases, that's how you can use other assets as an investment. The trick is, and this is probably getting old at this point, right? The trick is, can you do the homework and understand something as well or better than everybody else? If you can understand these assets better than other people, then you can use them to make big money, to make big profits. And that's simply by recognizing when something's underpriced, buying it, and then reselling it to somebody who's willing to pay more for it. I know I've read stories about people who do this with stuff like fine china, teacups. Somebody who goes into a Goodwill, buys a teacup for $25 and then resells it for, what was the other one, like $1.8 million. I saw some crazy one the other day, some huge amount. And you might look at these people as being crazy or lucky. Not crazy, lucky. These people are lucky, but that's not luck. What they're really doing in these cases is they're experts on something. They know more than anybody else. And you have to be an expert. You have to know when you see that teapot that it's worth more than the asking price. Buy it and then resell it. And if you don't understand that, if you don't have that knowledge, then there's no way you're ever going to become very successful investing in that area. Now, the cool thing about other assets is you can start taking advantage of whatever interests you. The kicker with cars for me is I'm a car buff. I love cars. I live for cars. I pay attention to cars 24/7. I buy cars. I pay attention to cars. The reason why I look at cars all the time is because I love it. So therefore, I love it so much that I fully understand when I have the money, or not when I have when something is worth the money, and therefore I can buy it. It's pretty simple. If you love teacups, you're going to know when a teacup is worth the money, and then you can buy it. So if there's something you're passionate about, do a lot of research in the value and start looking at where you might be able to find those things of value underpriced. It could be someplace like Goodwill. It could be someplace like eBay. It could be someplace like Craigslist. There's a whole lot of different places you can go to get these things for a price that would allow you to resell them at a huge profit, whatever they are. So the cool thing about other assets is it's really open. And a lot of times people don't realize that, whoa, I can invest in coins, I can invest in stamps, I can invest in commodities. But one of the things that I recommend people do when they're doing other assets is not to focus on long-term holdings. Right? Some people are successful there. I'm not telling you can't. I know some people who buy cars that are about 20 years old when they're at the very bottom of their depreciation curve. Then they hold on to them, waiting for 10, 20 years until those cars start appreciating. You can do that, but that's pretty risky. I think the best way to invest in other assets is when you can literally buy something today for $20 that's worth $20,000 somewhere else. It's doing that really quick turnaround. At least, in the cars I do quarterly, right? Because cars fluctuate a little bit. So I might buy or sell them over quarters. So I don't literally mean you've got to do it that day or that moment, but waiting 20 years might be a long time. But some people, if you really understand what's going on, it could be worth doing that with other assets. All right, so we talked about 4 different types of investments. We talked about real estate. We talked about stock market. We talked about entrepreneurship. And we talked about other assets. And I personally invest in all 4 of these, right? So I don't necessarily think there's one you should do and one you shouldn't. Real estate is a great thing to get started early on, especially if you have very little money. The odd thing is it sounds like something you need a lot of money to be successful in, and some of the richest people are, but it's really hard to get started when you have a lot of money. And I know that sounds weird, but it's really easy to get involved with when you barely have any money, and you can primarily offer mental effort and physical effort into that industry. The stock market's easy to play with almost any time, but to make a lot of money, you typically have to be pretty knowledgeable. But a lot of people choose to just stick with those broad market mutual funds. Entrepreneurship is once again one of those places you need to do a whole lot of homework, but if you're willing to do that homework, you become very, very successful. There's different ways you can take advantage of entrepreneurship from an investment standpoint. A lot of times people don't think about some of those options that are available to them. And then once again, other assets are very powerful if there's something you're really, really passionate about. Other assets can be a great way to invest in areas where you don't have a lot of money. Once again, you might be able to buy coins for $25 and resell them for a few $100. You might be able to buy stamps for a couple of bucks, resell them for a few $100. So those are those places that you have to put a little more legwork than some other investments. But once you really understand what's going on, you can almost start building those machines and take advantage of those opportunities when they show up. Kind of being prepared for those opportunities. But all 4 of these areas are ways that you can make pretty good money when it comes to investing. And so when you have those extra few bucks because you've managed to stabilize your wallet and you're trying to say, okay, I've got my $400, I got my $800, I got my $1,000, those are all places you can start spending it. And you can put it in a way that's going to help your money start working for you. So therefore, you're turning that money into more money. And once you have more money and you have $20,000, $100,000, $1 million, $10 million, $20 million, you can grow in a lot of these areas and you can just become more active and you can take advantage of some bigger chunks of things to do, see even some bigger returns. But you don't need a lot of money to get started in any of these areas, right? So hopefully that you learned a little something today and you realize what you can take advantage of. Now go out there and make the impossible happen.
It's the morning drive.